We want to welcome everybody that's here today and those who are watching online. And today we're going to continue the message that I started a couple weeks ago when we spoke about bondage. I promised that I would finish it up. We didn't have time a couple weeks ago to finish, but we're going to try and finish it up today. And if you remember, it was about breaking out of bondage. We talked about how bondage is created through sin. That when sin comes into our life, it puts us in a place of bondage. It puts us in a place where we can no longer do the things that God would have us do or that we would want to do freely in our mind anymore because we're oppressed with all this other stuff that comes in. So today we've entitled the message, Staying Free. And when we started this message a couple weeks ago, we talked about how God never places his people in bondage. Remember, we spoke about how he will put boundaries. He never places us in bondage, but he will put boundaries. Places that he doesn't want us to go into because it's not good for us. So all of the Beatitudes, all of the things that are put forth in God's word, all the commandments that he gave were not for him. They were meant for us, for our betterment. They were meant to give us a guideline in which to live our life so that we could prosper and flourish. Since the creation of time, God's desire for people was to flourish, to live abundantly, and to live with all of everything, all provision. That's why he placed Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. He wanted them to have dominion over the entire world. My wife's going to give a sermon soon, I'm sure, because she was giving me one the other day as she was sitting there looking at the ocean. But it was just profound, the word that he gave her about the sea. And God gave us all this provision for a purpose. It was for our own good. And in that whole thing, he also placed boundaries, things that he didn't want us to get involved in. Because he said, if you do get involved in it, it's going to change the way you live your life. It's going to cause things to happen that you don't necessarily need to be part of. It's going to create sin. Sometimes we look at, I heard it on the radio this morning, that we look at God like a probation officer. You know, we're constantly worried about, well, did I do everything right? Did I check in? Did I read my? Did I check off the Bible? Did I read my 4 scriptures? Did I go to church? Oh my God, God's not like that. He's not standing over you as a teacher with a ruler ready to spank you when you get out of line. What he wants is relationship. And the thing that gets in the way of his relationship with us is bondage. It's sin. Sin is the one thing that can take us from the presence of God. So it's very important that we understand bondage and we understand what sin is and how to deal with that in our Christian walk. He wants us to accomplish everything that he set us on earth to do. He's always respected our free will and our freedom to choose. But like any good father, he encourages us to make sound decisions for the betterment of ourselves. He even realizes that we're going to come up short. That's why he gave his son on the cross. That's why he brought forgiveness. Because he knew we couldn't do it on our own. We're human. He knew we were going to falter and fail. But yet he promised never to leave or forsake us. Today we want to talk about decisions. We do so because our decisions will often decide the outcome of our situations in life. Our decisions have consequences. And we learned during the last message that although we're free to make our own choices, we are not free of the consequences that they bring. That's right. We need to make sure we understand that. God will let us make a choice, but the consequence of that choice lies with us. We can't blame God when we go down the path and then cry out, "Why aren't you hearing me, Lord?" And we do that often, don't we? It's not God's fault that we go out of those boundaries. We need to place responsibility where it begins, with our choices, with our decisions. I say often that we can only control what we have control over. Think about that. So many times in our relationships, in our homes, and all these things, we want to, as people, we want to control everything around us so that we live in this perfect state that we believe is what we need to be in. When in reality, we have no control over what's going to happen tomorrow. We have no control over a lot of what happens in our life. We can do the best to minimize and the best decisions that we can to try and go forward. But at the end of the day, we have no control over what might happen. Only God can control what happens. And only He can affect the very outcome in our lives. In Ecclesiastes 1:14, it says plainly, I have seen all the works which have been done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after wind. What is crooked cannot be straightened, and what is lacking cannot be counted. You see, the prophet understood we don't have control over tomorrow, but we have control over our decisions. And that's what we're going to focus on today, is the decisions that we make. So today we're going to compare two lives in the Bible. Two different lives, and we're going to show you, hopefully, how some of the small decisions that they made a huge impact on the outcome of their life. And how sin and the enemy came in and affected their decisions. So we're going to start with Judges chapter 13. And this is a story about Samson. And I like Samson because, I get Samson. I do. He was a man's man. He's a big, strong guy, liked his women. He wasn't afraid to show his power and his strength. But like a lot of men, he thought it was within him. And I'm just being straight, right? He thought, I'll work out. I can handle anything. Samson's got this. When in reality, Ecclesiastes was in play. It was all vanity. He had no control over tomorrow, or did he? The decisions he made a huge impact on his life. In Judges 13, 3-5, we start out, it says, Then the angel of the Lord appeared to a woman and said to her, this is Samson's mother, Behold, you are barren and have borne no children, but you shall conceive and give birth to a son. Now therefore be careful not to drink wine or strong drink, nor eat any unclean thing. For behold, you shall conceive and give birth to a son, and no razor shall come upon his head, for the boy shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel from the hand of the Philistines. Now there's important parts in here. Nazarite. Okay? He will be a Nazarite from birth. A Nazarite was meant for a period. It was kind of like fasting. It was something that a man or woman did for a period of time, when they separated themselves from all the world and they dedicated that time to relationship with Christ. It was to be set apart. And the rules of being a Nazarite were pretty simple. No razor or haircut would ever come upon them. They would not cut their hair. They would not touch anything unclean. And they would not have wine or any fermented drink, not even grapes or raisins. Right? Now, I know a lot of people in this world tell you that drinking alcohol is a sin. I'm not one of those people. I'm not. Why? Because I read this book. And this book plainly tells you that to drink wine is not a sin. To get drunk becomes a sin. It's boundaries, right? It's boundaries. We need to know the boundaries that God sets for us so we can make proper decisions. So to be a Nazarite, he said Samson will be a Nazarite from birth. And he even instructed Samson's mother, you will not do these things. Why? Because when he comes out, I want him pure. I want him pure. I want him ready to be set apart and filled with my spirit. Okay? It was he was going to fast for his life, if you will. That was the plan that God had. What else do we learn here? God had a plan for his life. His plan may be different than your plan. We have to know the plan. But God told his mother plainly, this is the plan for your son. So God had a plan for him just like he has a plan for you. He was to yield himself completely to God for a time. As we go through the story, and we know, most everybody in here knows this story, and I won't have time to go through everything because it's quite long. But as Samson starts growing, he finds out that he has some strength, right? And he also has an affinity to women he should not be around. As we would say these days, he liked the women that you wouldn't take home to mama. Okay? In this case, he liked Philistine women. And if we get to chapter 14, verse 3, it says, then his father and his mother said to him, is there no woman among the daughters of your relatives or among our people that you can go to take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? But Samson said to his father, get her for me, for she looks good to me. So he wanted to hang out with sinners, basically, is what this is getting to, right? He wanted to hang out with someone who was uncircumcised. He wanted the women of the world. And his parents cautioned him, son, you're supposed to be a Nazirite. We have to make sound decisions. Couldn't you find maybe a good Christian girl to hang out with? What was his answer? But Samson said to his father, get her for me, for she looks good to me. It was all about what he thought she was, right? She looked good. Didn't say she was good, but she looked that way. How many times do we make decisions in our relationships because of how a person looks? Let's be honest. How many times do we go down the road and say, yeah, I definitely could hang out with her because, wow, she's beautiful. I said that when I met my wife. I didn't have no idea the true beauty of my wife. And how many times have we met somebody who we think is the most handsome or most beautiful person in the world, and they open their mouth and they become the most ugliest person on earth? Right? Because why? We're making decisions outside of God's will. Had Samson stopped and prayed about his decision, things may have been different. But he didn't. He craved women that were not suited for him against his parents' wishes, based on looks and not love. And the story continues. At one point he goes and he hangs out with a prostitute. In Judges 14:6, it says, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily. This is when a young lion came after him. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, so that he tore him as one tears through a young goat, though he had nothing in his hands. But he didn't tell his mother or father what he had done. Okay? So here's this young man who's a Nazirite. It's like many of us, right? We're separated for a time. We want to do God's will, and here comes the enemy. And in this case, it was a pretty powerful enemy. But I want to show you something. He tore it with his bare hands as one would tear a very small animal. Why? Was it Samson's power? No. It says plainly, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. Yes. You see, when the Spirit of God helps you, you go from natural to supernatural. You can now do things that you would never even think of doing before. You now have power that is from God himself. And guess what? Since you gave your heart to Christ, that power lives right inside of you. But we have to make sure that we're not like Samson, and we don't remember that it come from God and not from him. Because Samson, he thought, I'm getting strong. And then I find it odd that he didn't tell his mother or father what he had done. Don't you find that odd? I mean, if a lion came after me, I'd be like, Dad, you should see what I did. It was this big and had big hair, and he came in, and man, I ripped him up. And look what I did. Let me show you. But he didn't do it. Why? Bible doesn't really tell us why. But I can surmise that he remembered he wasn't supposed to touch any unclean thing. So maybe there was a little guilt. Maybe there was a little worry there that, hey, I'm not making sound decisions. Who knows? But he didn't tell his mom and dad. And then it says he went back to the lion in verse 8 through 9. And he says when he returned later to take her, as when he's looking for his wife, he turned aside to look at the carcass of the lion, and behold, a swarm of bees and honey were in the body of the lion. So he scraped the honey into his hands and went on eating as he went. When he came to his father and mother, he gave some to them, and they ate it. But again, he did not tell them that he had scraped the honey out of the body of the lion. Now it becomes a little more clear, right? He didn't tell them because he had touched something that was unclean. Right? The commandments were back then that you didn't touch anything that was dead. A carcass was considered an unclean object. And he knew, because his mama taught him well, she probably took him to church. And she told him, son, you're a Nazirite. God spoke to me about your life. But Samson made a decision. And not only did he hang out with it the first time, but he went back to it. Okay? And isn't it cool how the Bible shows us what the enemy will do to you when you go back to your sin? Not only did he go back to the lion who he had killed and had defeated, but now, the enemy stuck something there, a jelly donut. Right? He filled it with honey. He filled it with something sweet, something that he knew Samson couldn't take away from him. He just had to have it. Right? Not only did he go back to the carcass, which was a violation of his Nazirite rule, but he partook from it. What happens when we make decisions and nothing happens to us right away? Or we think we got away with it. Or we did it in darkness, so no one else knew. Then the very next time, it's much easier to return, right? Because if I got away with it once, I can do it again. And the enemy knows that. Yeah. The enemy knows that, hey, once I took that joint, nobody knew. It was okay. I did good. I think I'm going to try it again. Oh, the next time it's going to be even sweeter. The devil's going to make sure that it's sweeter. The devil's going to plant that addiction seed there for you to partake. So you keep coming back. Okay? I crave a God and a leader who would tell me to stay away and help me do so, than to put something there that would bring me down. But there was this honey, and of course he didn't tell his mom or dad, try this. He gave it to them. They loved it, but he didn't tell them that it came from something that he never should have been part of. Because if he had, they wouldn't have partaken. And they probably would have chastised him for doing so. Okay? This day and age, the internet is a lot like that lion. Know what your kids are partaking in. Know. Talk to them. He wasn't supposed to touch any unclean thing, and that's why there was honey there. Because the devil knew that he would partake. We continue in chapter 15, verse 16. It says, Then Samson said, With the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of a donkey, I have killed 1,000 men. This is when he started going after the Philistines. I killed a lion. Now I'm going to go out and I'm going to take care of my enemies. Why? Because Samson's all powerful. So he got a jawbone of a donkey, which is what? Again, he went back. That jawbone was part of a carcass. Unclean. But now I've been able to kill a lion. I've been able to partake in some of that. And now I'm going to use part of that and I'm going to go out and kill some more people. All with things that he should not have been involved in. And then his statement sums it up for us. He says, with the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of a donkey, I have killed 1,000 men. I have killed 1,000 men. Okay? I dare say, without God's Spirit living in him, he would not have accomplished that task. Right? Now I want you to see something. God's purpose for his life was happening with or without Samson. The enemy was being defeated. But I know God's heart was, I wish he would have listened to me and did it my way. Oh, the glory we would have. And Samson said, I made it possible. Never acknowledged God as being the force within him that gave him the strength. So we go to Judges 16, 1 through 2. It says, Now Samson went to Gaza, and he saw a harlot there and went into her. When it was told to the Gazites, saying, Samson has come here, they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the gate of the city, and they kept silent all night, saying, Let us wait until morning light, then we will kill him. Okay? Once again, his desire for ungodly women put him in a situation. And just like before, the enemy showed up with a plan. And that plan was to take his life. Samson thought, oh, I'll have a moment of pleasure. Little did he know the enemy lied in wait. Right? God still made a provision and a way for him to get out. In chapter 16, verse 5, it says, The lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, this is after he met Delilah, his last girlfriend. Once again, someone his mom would not have chosen. Said, entice him and see where his great strength lies and how we may overpower him, that we may bind him to afflict him. Then we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver. So the Philistines, his enemies, now come to his new girlfriend, who is ungodly, and says, we need to know how this man gets his strength. She couldn't tell him it was the Spirit of God because she what? She wasn't of God. She had no idea that the Spirit of God is what gave him the power. But she recognized that he had power. And she traded it, just like Judas traded our Jesus for pieces of silver. And we all know the story, right? She went to him and said, oh, my love, tell me what gives you the great strength. And because he was such a verbose guy, he said, well, dear, it's simple. You got to tie me up with these ropes. And she did it, and he busted him, and he killed more people. And he got a big joke out of it. Several times he was approached by this woman. He continued to be tempted and tempted and tempted by her. And he continued to lie to her about what gave him the strength. And then one day she laid him on her knee. And she said, how come you don't give me your heart? Why you lie to me? I thought you loved me. Oh my God, does that sound familiar in our relationships? Right? We've gotten into a relationship that wasn't holy, wasn't of God. And now we're listening to the enemy tell us that we don't love them, that we don't care for them. You cannot love me if you continue to lie to me. I'm kind of wondering what kind of love she had if she was willing to sell him for 1,100 pieces of silver. But that didn't enter into her mind, right? That's the way the enemy works. So those small decisions that we make, he pondered that. He said, I'm sure he thought, man, should I just tell her? And at the end, he tells her. He tells her, hey, if you cut off my hair, I'll lose my strength. Oh, he falls asleep. She supercuts him. Right? When he wakes up, she says, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And they come in and they bind him. And just like before, he says, not a problem. Not a problem. In 16:20, she said, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And he awoke from his sleep and said, I will go out as at other times and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. This is so important, folks, because he had gone back to the well of sin so many times that God said, I can't have your back anymore. The consequences of his choices became clear. Right? God was there for him all throughout his life. Even in the bad decisions that he made, God never forsaked him. But at some point, God said, son, I can't take this ride with you. The choices you make continue to screw your life up. And now, son, I have to let you go. I have to let you understand the consequences of what you've done. And that's a hard thing for a parent to do. Right? Think about some of the decisions we've made for our kids. I know I have. I tell my wife often, there are certain things I would have definitely changed raising my son. I have a great son, but I know I made mistakes. Had I a chance to do it over again, certain things I would have changed. Why? Because I know it would have affected him in a positive way. But I can't hold all of it. He still has a right to make decisions, just like we do. And if we continue to go back to sin over and over and over and over and over again, it's going to overtake us to the point that God says, son, I can't be with you in this moment. So Samson relied on his previous victories. It worked before, it'll work again. I got high last time and nothing happened. I can do it again. I'll do it one more time and then I'll get free. Oh my God, if I could hear how many people have told me that in my career. Will you? Or will you separate yourself from God's grace? Judges 16:25 says, it so happened when they were in high spirits. Now they had already taken Samson and they had gouged his eyes out. They burned him out with a stick. He was now blind. But the Bible says his hair began to grow. Okay? Now I'm going to stop here for a second because it's very important. When he told Delilah, if you cut off my hair, you will take my power, it had nothing to do with his hair. Nothing to do with his hair. It had to do with his spirit. Right? What he was in effect telling her was, if you separate me from my God, I lose my strength. Don't get it confused that the hair had the power. The hair only had the power because God's spirit was within him. And when he told her, take away, move me from Christ, and she did, and they were able to bind him. They were able to take his eyes out. But the Bible says, but his hair began to grow. God in my life that somewhere along the line, with all my screw-ups, I went to a church, not unlike this, and my hair began to grow. Right? Because when it did, it's like a fish hook. I felt the pull of Christ coming back to my life. Right? You feel God's calling grab a hold of you. And you start seeing the decisions that you made, and your life becomes a little more clear. And you know that you know that you know that God is still there. And that all you have to do is ask for forgiveness. And He puts you back into a place of righteousness. His hair began to grow. And in 1625 it says, it happened when they were in high spirits that they said, call for Samson that he may amuse us. So they called for Samson from the prison and to entertain them. And they made him stand between the pillars. Oh my God, isn't that just like the enemy? Somebody screws up and it's all over the internet. The very next day, let us show you what he did. This man of God, this supposed leader, whatever it was. Let us show you, people. Let's be amused by his failures. When they had all this time to maybe show some of the good things about this individual. But the enemy doesn't do that. Right? Let's expose him. Ain't that what we say? Let's expose him. Let's expose the truth. If we were going to expose the truth, that'd be great. But instead we expose the failures. So we all know how it ends, right? He gets with that little boy and he says, please place my hands around these pillars. And then he calls out to God for forgiveness. And he calls out to him and says, Lord, if you just bring me my strength one more time for your glory, God. For your glory, God. It's not about me, it's about you. And God was faithful once again. He never left or forsook him. And he crushed that building. And all inside, including him, perished. And I read that sometime and I'm like, but God, he died. You ever been in a movie like that? I went to a movie with my friend one time. It was about this ship. And it was called Open Water or something. And we watched the whole movie, and they were, the ship was rocking, and they got thrown in the ocean. It lasted for like an hour and a half, and I mean, it was a horrible, fight for life. And at the end, they died. My buddy came out of that movie, and he was like, that is the worst movie. They died. Everything's supposed to have a good ending. Maybe he died because he simply asked God to take his life. If you read the scripture, he told him, I want to die here with them. He recognized maybe his weaknesses. Samson's not going to make good decisions in the future. Samson screwed up a lot of things. Lord, just while I'm in your presence and I have everything that I need from you and I'm in a perfect place of redemption, that's good enough for me. Maybe that was his time. And just like the word that he said at the beginning, he will begin to save my people. But what a shame that his choices didn't allow him to physically see his victory. It's the reality. However, there's another story in the Bible, over in Genesis. And this boy is named Joseph. And Joseph one morning woke up. He was a young shepherd boy, and he told his brothers, I had a dream. And in this dream, well, you guys were kind of like bowing to me. He said Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, please listen to the dream that I have in Genesis 37:5. What did the dream do? The dream showed Joseph that God had a plan for his life. Sounds similar? In 37:10 in Genesis, it said, he related to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have had? Shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come to bow ourselves down before you on the ground? Whew, that was prophetic. Didn't even know it. They understood God had a plan. Joseph, he kept his manners. Genesis 37:13 says, Israel said to Joseph, we are not your brothers pasturing the flock in Shechem. Come and I will send you to them. And he said to him, I will go. I love that. His daddy told him, hey, your brothers are out there. I need you to go. And he said, yeah, Dad, I'll go. Even though his dad had just said, what, are we supposed to be your slaves? Never took it to heart. He realized, I'm a child. This is my father. He's asked me to do something. I'm going to go. Made a decision to be obedient. I will go. He knew he was hated by his brothers. It didn't matter. He needed to please his father. How many of you are willing to please your father even though your brothers and sisters don't like you? I'm just saying. Genesis 37:20-21 says, now then, come and let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we will say, a wild beast has devoured him. Then let us see what we become of his dreams. But Reuben heard this and rescued him out of their hands and said, let us not take his life. So his brothers said, here comes that dreamer. Let's whack him. We'll see what his dreams what his dreams do to him then. But isn't it cool how even in the hatred, God puts an angel? God puts something there to protect you. Why? Because he's got a plan. And he knows that as long as you're in his boundaries and you're making the right decisions, I don't care what happens, you can't be harmed. Joseph knew the boundaries. Genesis 39:5 says, it came about from the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he owned. The Lord blessed the Egyptian's house on account of Joseph. Thus the Lord's blessing was upon all that he owned in the house and in the field. See, his brothers sold him into slavery. There were some wandering people going by and they said, let's just sell him instead of killing him. So they did. Isn't it odd how a lot of the decisions in the Bible have to do with finances? 30 pieces of silver, 1,100 pieces of silver, whatever they got for Joseph.
Come on, that's a good word.
How many decisions do we make based on money? And how does the consequences of those choices impact our life? But the Lord blessed not only Joseph, but he blessed his employer. Because Joseph was there, the whole place started flourishing. And the light that was in Joseph, because of his obedience, because of his decisions, because of his feelings and his comfort with Christ, began to show among all the people in this foreign land. They saw his light. They gave him favor, and he brought favor to the entire place because he was a child of the Most High. And he was quickly recognized to the point that he was given great stature in the land. And here comes the enemy. In 39, verse 7 and 8, it says, it came about after these events that his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph. And she said, lie with me. But he refused and said to the master's wife, behold, with me here, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. And he's put me in charge of all that he owns. So what did he do when temptation came? Oh, he made a right decision. He saw the queen herself had said, lie with me. Joseph was a lot different than Samson, right? Yeah. Joseph said, your husband has just blessed me with all that I have, with such favor. I know who I am in Christ. I know who I am in this land. I know the blessings that God has provided for me. How could I ever do such a thing? And he made a choice. And his choice was to leave. And to leave is so quickly that he left part of his clothes. She grabbed onto it and he pulled right out of the clothing. Sometimes, folks, we just got to get out of there. Stop playing with it. Stop showing up. Stop saying, well, I'm there, just there to lead them to Christ. Get out. Joseph knew who he was in Christ. He placed his integrity above his temptation, and he removed himself from the situation. In Genesis 39:14-15 says, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled outside, she called to the men and said to them, see, he has brought in a Hebrew to us to make sport of us. He came in to lie with me, and I screamed. And when he heard that, I raised my voice and screamed. He left his clothes beside me and fled and went outside. So she tells this story about Joseph, right? A story that led him to be thrown in prison for 2 years for a crime he never committed. He was thrown in prison. And he wasn't like a lot of us would have been. I'm innocent. I will fight this to my death. Right? There was no appeals court. The king himself said, go. He didn't sit there and squander and whine and cry over his situation. What he did is he went into prison, and guess what? He found favor once again. Because God said, you never left the boundaries. Yes, it may look like you're in a place of bondage right now, but you're really free. In fact, you're free over everybody in the prison. And Joseph stayed in prison 2 years for something he never did. But he never let it falter the way he felt about his God. He knew that his brothers had sold him, and look what it got him. He knew that even being in prison was better than being dead. And he was going to trust in his Father. Genesis 48 says, then they said to him, we have had a dream, and there is no one to interpret it. And Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell it to me. So now he's in prison where he has no business being. And the two people in there, the baker and some other guy are in the prison with him, right? And they say, hey, we had these dreams. No one here to interpret it for us. But he realized not only did God have a purpose for his life, but he had given him a gift of interpretation, a gift of prophecy. He was able to interpret dreams. And he gave the honor to who? Doesn't God know how to interpret dreams? He never said like Samson, I'll do it in my power. He said, I know God. And man, I can ask him and he'll help you. Like Danette said, through him, not from him. And they gave him the dream and he was able to interpret them. And lo and behold, they came true. But did he get out of jail? Not yet. But he stayed in the boundaries. In Genesis 41:1, it says, now it happened at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh himself had a dream. And behold, he was standing by the Nile. And all his people couldn't interpret Pharaoh's dream. But somebody remembered, I had a dream when I was in prison. And this young man, Joseph, he has a gift from God. And he told me about God, and he told me about my dream. And you know what? It was true. And Pharaoh called him back up out of jail. And he said, I have this dream. And if you'll just give me an opportunity to tell you the dream, and you can interpret it, I'll open the windows of promise to you. And Joseph did, and he told him there's going to be a famine. And man, for 7 years, we're going to have everything we need. And after that, it's going to get hard times. And it came to pass. And he was put above everybody else. And in fact, in Genesis 41:15 through 16, he tells Pharaoh, Pharaoh tells him he had a dream and you can interpret it. And he said, I've heard that about you, that when you hear a dream, you can interpret. Joseph then answered Pharaoh, saying, again, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer. Amen. And then in 41:40, it says, you shall be over my house. This is Pharaoh telling him. And according to your command, all my people shall do homage. Only in the throne will I be greater than you. And I'm going to close here. But the Pharaoh himself said, the only person in this land with more authority than me is you. The only one that's over you is me. He was given that much authority. More than the queen who tempted him. Right? And then his brothers come in because of the famine. The same brothers who sold him. Looking for grain. And I love this about Joseph. Because most of us would have been like, payback. Right? Ain't that what we think of? Do you remember when? Let me take you back to the pit you threw me in. Do you remember when you sold me as a slave? That never entered his mind. Yeah, he had a little fun with them. Who can resist fun? Right? He had a little fun with them. But watch what happens. Genesis 45:4 says, then Joseph said to his brothers, please come closer to me. And they came closer. And he was weeping and crying now. He disclosed who he was. And he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. Now do not be grieved and do not be angry with yourselves because you sold me. For God sent me before you to preserve life. Man, that was a good deal. He told them, don't be hanged, don't be mad, don't be worried, don't hate yourself for what you did to me. I forgive you. I recognize that God's plan was bigger than your plan. And that he put me here because just like the dream I had when I was a young boy, there was a plan for my life. So don't worry about what happened in the past. Let's forgive and forget. Let's go home and get daddy. I got blessings for the people who oppressed me. Now you see how the decisions we make can change the way our life goes? Sometimes we have to look at our bondage situations, the things that we think are locking us up, and we have to decide, is it coming from God? Is this a boundary that I'm not supposed to cross? Is this a decision I shouldn't be making? Right? And then make those right decisions. Because a small decision today could lead to a magnificent blessing in the future. You know, in my job, a lot of people tell me, why work so hard? You will never win the war. And I always give them the same answer. First of all, no war was ever won without a battle being fought. And I may never be able to win the war, but I guarantee I'll take battles. And if enough of us win a battle, guess what? Whew! The kingdom wins the war. God bless you. Are you going to... Sweetheart.